The town of Cassino did not fall in a single battle. It was broken slowly, stone by stone, position by position, street by street. By early 1944, the once quiet Italian town had become something else entirely, a layered battlefield where every ruined wall, shattered building, and collapsed roadway held potential for defense. Above it all, the monastery loomed on the heights, watching over a landscape that had been transformed into one of the most difficult combat zones of the war. For the German defenders, Cassino was not just another position. It was a line that had to hold, and so they built their defense accordingly, not with open trenches or easily identifiable fortifications, but with strong points hidden within the ruins themselves. Machine guns were placed behind broken stone walls. Rifle positions were carved into collapsed structures. Anti-tank weapons were concealed in narrow streets where armor could be channeled and destroyed at close range. Each position supported the next. Each approach was covered, and every attempt to advance through the town became a fight measured in yards. British infantry had already tried. More than once. They had moved through the outskirts, crossed open ground under fire, and pushed into the ruins, only to be stopped by positions that could not be easily identified until it was too late. The problem was not just resistance. It was structure. The buildings of Cassino, even in ruins, provided natural reinforcement. Thick stone walls absorbed small arms fire. Collapsed sections created layered cover that could not be cleared quickly. And within that environment, German strongpoints became extremely difficult to eliminate without direct, concentrated force. Artillery could damage the area, but it could not always reach the exact point where resistance was anchored. Infantry could approach, but without something to break the position itself, they were forced into close-range engagements that favored the defender. What was needed was something else. Something that could be brought forward. Something that could deliver force directly into the strongpoint without relying on long-range fire or large-scale bombardment. That was where the weapon came in. It did not look like much. In fact, among some of the troops, it had been dismissed almost immediately upon first sight. Compared to standard field guns, it appeared compact, improvised, even. Its construction lacked the polished appearance of factory-built artillery, and its deployment often involved methods that seemed closer to engineering improvisation than formal doctrine. Among certain units, the nickname came quickly. The garage gun. The implication was clear. Something put together quickly. Something not entirely trusted. Something that did not inspire confidence in the same way as more conventional equipment. But like many weapons in that war, its appearance did not reflect its purpose. Because it was not designed for open field engagement. It was designed for positions like this. Forward, in the ruins of Cassino, a British platoon lay pinned behind the remains of a partially collapsed wall. The structure had once been part of a larger building, but now it offered only fragmented cover. Just enough to shield them from direct fire, but not enough to allow movement. Every attempt to push forward had been met with immediate resistance. The source of that resistance was a German strongpoint located less than 50 yards ahead. Hidden within the remains of a stone structure, the position was well concealed. Only the flashes of gunfire revealed its exact location, and even then, the angle made it difficult to engage directly. The defenders had chosen their position carefully, using the natural geometry of the ruins to limit exposure while maintaining a clear field of fire across the approach. Machine gun bursts came intermittently, short, controlled, each one forcing the British soldiers to remain low, pressed against the ground or behind whatever cover they could find. Movement was nearly impossible. The platoon commander studied the position through a narrow gap in the broken wall. He had already attempted to direct rifle fire toward the strongpoint, but the rounds had little effect against the thick stone and layered debris protecting it. Grenades would not reach. A direct assault would be costly. The situation had stalled. Then came the call over the radio. Short, uncertain, but promising. Support was on the way. Minutes passed. The gunfire continued. And then, from behind the line, something began to move forward through the rubble. At first, it was difficult to see clearly. Just a shape being maneuvered carefully between broken walls and debris. accompanied by a small team of soldiers guiding it into position. As it came closer, its outline became clearer. Compact, mounted low, its barrel short compared to standard artillery, and carried forward not with the weight of a large gun, but with the deliberate effort of men positioning something meant to operate close to the fight. The platoon commander glanced at it briefly. He had heard the name before, the garage gun. He had also heard the doubts. But looking at the strong point ahead and the lack of alternatives, he understood something immediately. It did not matter what it was called. It mattered what it could do. The crew positioned the weapon behind the partial cover of the broken wall, aligning it carefully with the direction of the German position. Adjustments were made quickly, the barrel angled to account for the short distance and the obstructed line of sight. This was not long-range fire. This was not indirect support. This was something else entirely. The loader stepped into position. The gunner steadied the weapon. The commander watched the strong point ahead, waiting for the moment when the firing line would open. Because for the first time since the engagement had begun, they had something that could reach into the position itself. And whatever this garage gun lacked in appearance, it was about to be tested where it mattered most. The weapon was dragged the final few feet into position under fire. It did not arrive with the presence of artillery. There was no wide emplacement, no prepared firing platform, no distance between it and the enemy. Instead, it was placed directly into the fight, just behind the fractured wall where the infantry had been pinned, its barrel aligned toward a target barely 50 yards away. Dust drifted down from the broken stone as another burst from the German machine gun struck the outer edge of the ruins. Fragments chipped away from the wall, scattering across the ground where the crew worked. They didn't stop. The gunner dropped to one knee behind the weapon, adjusting its angle by small increments, using the edge of the wall as partial concealment. The loader moved beside him, already preparing the round. His hands steady despite the noise and pressure building around them. Up close, the weapon looked even less impressive. Short-barreled, compact, mounted in a way that seemed almost improvised compared to standard field guns. It lacked the long reach and visual authority of artillery. It lacked the mechanical complexity of heavier systems. And to anyone unfamiliar with its purpose, it still carried that same impression. Something assembled quickly. Something not quite meant for this kind of fight. The garage gun. But here, in the confined geometry of Cassino's ruins, those assumptions no longer applied. Because range was not the problem. Accuracy over distance was not the problem. The problem was a strong point built into stone, and the need to break it open. Set, the gunner said quietly. The platoon commander shifted slightly, watching the line of sight toward the German position. The machine gun had paused for a moment, likely adjusting position or waiting for movement to resume. That pause created an opening. "Take it," he said. The loader slid the round into place. The motion was quick, practiced, controlled. The gunner leaned in, sighting along the short barrel toward the point where the flashes had appeared moments earlier. There was no elaborate targeting system, no long calculation, just alignment, distance, and timing. Another burst of German fire erupted. Rounds snapped overhead, striking the upper edge of the wall and sending fragments downward. One piece of stone struck the ground near the loader, but he didn't flinch. The gunner held steady, waiting for the exact moment when the firing point revealed itself again. Then a flash. On. The trigger was pulled. The weapon fired with a deep, concussive blast that filled the confined space with sound and pressure. Unlike the sharp crack of a rifle or the rapid tearing of a machine gun, this was something heavier, denser, more contained, yet carrying a force that was immediately felt by everyone nearby. The recoil drove back into the mount, the entire weapon shifting slightly against its supports. The round struck the strong point. The impact was immediate. Stone fractured outward from the point of contact, a section of the wall breaking under the force of the hit. Dust and debris burst into the air, obscuring the position momentarily as fragments scattered across the ground. For a fraction of a second, the machine gun fire stopped. Not silenced, but interrupted. Inside the British position, the effect was felt instantly. The platoon commander leaned forward, eyes fixed on the target through the drifting dust. Again, he said. The loader was already moving. Another round was brought up, slid into place with the same controlled motion. The gunner adjusted slightly. The first shot had revealed the structure. Now they could see where to hit. The German strongpoint, once hidden within the ruins, was beginning to show its shape under pressure. Sections of stone that had provided concealment were now broken, exposing angles that had not been visible before. The second shot would not be blind. It would be deliberate. Ready. The gunner steadied the weapon again, aligning the barrel toward the newly exposed section of the position. Outside, the German defenders reacted. Shouting. Movement. The machine gun resumed fire, but it was different now, less controlled, more reactive. The disruption from the first impact had forced them to adjust, and in that adjustment they had lost some of their advantage. Fire. The second round left the barrel with the same deep force, striking slightly lower than the first. This time the effect was more pronounced. The already weakened section of the wall gave way under the impact, collapsing inward as the structure lost its integrity. Debris fell into the interior of the strongpoint, filling the space with dust and fragments that made continued operation difficult. The machine gun fell silent again. Not briefly, but completely. For a moment, there was no return fire. Only the sound of settling debris and the faint echo of the shot reverberating through the ruins. The platoon commander did not wait. "Stand by to move," he said. Because now, for the first time since the engagement had begun, the strongpoint was open, and the weapon that had been dismissed had done exactly what it was brought forward to do. For a brief moment after the second impact, the battlefield seemed to hesitate. The machine gun that had controlled the approach for so long was silent. Dust continued to drift from the shattered strongpoint, hanging low in the air and obscuring whatever remained inside. Broken stone lay scattered across the ground where the wall had partially collapsed inward, creating an opening where there had been none before. The platoon commander didn't wait for certainty. "Move!" The order cut through the stillness, and the men responded instantly. They rose from behind the broken wall and pushed forward in short, controlled bursts, crossing the ground that had been impossible to traverse just moments earlier. Boots struck loose stone and debris as they advanced, weapons raised, eyes fixed on the opening created by the gun. Hensley, moving near the front this time, felt the difference immediately. The same ground, the same distance, but now no fire, no bursts snapping overhead, no forced hesitation with every step. The absence of resistance was as powerful as the resistance itself had been. Behind them, the crew of the garage gun worked quickly. The weapon was adjusted again, the barrel shifting slightly to maintain coverage of the position. Another round was prepared, not because it was immediately needed, but because in a fight like this the moment could change without warning. The gun was no longer an experiment. It was now part of the advance. Ahead, the platoon closed the distance. 30 yards. 20. The shape of the strongpoint became clearer as they approached. What had once been a solid defensive position was now fractured, its protective stone layers broken, its internal space partially exposed. The geometry that had concealed the defenders was gone, replaced by jagged edges and open angles that no longer provided the same level of protection. But the danger was not gone. It had only changed. "Watch it! Inside!" someone shouted, because a damaged strongpoint could still fight. Hensley slowed slightly as he reached the edge of the broken structure, keeping his weapon trained on the opening. The dust had begun to settle, revealing movement inside, unclear shapes shifting behind what remained of the interior cover. "Grenade!" another voice called. A British soldier stepped forward, pulled the pin, and threw. The grenade disappeared into the opening. A second later, the explosion echoed within the confined space, sending another wave of dust and debris outward. The blast was contained but effective, its force amplified by the enclosed structure. "Go!" The platoon surged forward again. Hensley entered with the others, stepping over broken stone and splintered wood as they pushed into the remains of the position. Inside, visibility was limited. Dust filled the air, mixing with the sharp smell of explosives and disturbed earth. The space that had once been a controlled defensive position was now disordered. Collapsed sections of wall blocked certain angles. Equipment lay scattered. And whatever structure had allowed the German defenders to maintain their fire had been disrupted beyond immediate recovery. There was movement to the right. Hensley turned, weapon raised. A figure shifted behind a partially collapsed section of stone. One of the defenders, disoriented by the blasts and the sudden entry of infantry. There was no time for hesitation. A short burst, then silence. Around him, the rest of the platoon cleared the remaining space with practiced precision. Each man moved methodically, covering angles, checking blind spots, ensuring that no resistance remained hidden within the broken structure. Within seconds, it was over. Clear. The call moved through the position, confirmed by multiple voices. The strong point that had held them back, pinned them down, stopped their advance completely, was gone. Hensley stepped back slightly, lowering his weapon as the immediate tension began to release. He looked at the interior of the structure, trying to understand how something so solid, so well positioned, had been broken so quickly once the right force had been applied. It wasn't that the defense had been weak. It had been well built, well placed, effective, but it had been designed to resist a certain kind of attack. And the garage gun had not followed that pattern. From outside, the platoon commander entered the position, his eyes moving quickly across the damage. "How?" one of the soldiers asked almost instinctively. The commander glanced back toward the broken wall where the weapon had been positioned. "That," he said simply. Outside, the crew was already preparing to move again. The weapon was being shifted forward, carefully, deliberately, ready to be used against the next position that might require the same kind of force. No one called it a garage gun now. Not here. Not after seeing what it had done. Because whatever doubts had existed before, they had been left behind with the broken stone of the strongpoint. And as the platoon reformed and prepared to push deeper into the ruins of Cassino, they moved with something they had not had before. Momentum. The effect of the breakthrough did not stay contained within the ruins of that single strongpoint. It spread. At first slowly, through movement, through observation, through the quiet understanding passed between soldiers who had just seen something change. Then faster as the implications became clear. The position that had halted them had not been bypassed. It had been broken, and that changed how everything ahead would be approached. The platoon did not pause long. The moment a defensive line gives way, hesitation becomes a risk. The commander reorganized quickly, redistributing men, adjusting sectors of fire, and preparing for the next push deeper into the shattered town. But this time, the advance did not rely on infantry alone. The garage gun moved with them. It was dragged forward again through rubble and broken ground, its crew working in coordinated silence. The weapon's compact design, once a reason for skepticism, now revealed its advantage. Could be brought where larger guns could not. It could be positioned inside ruined streets, behind fractured walls, and within the narrow geometry of a town that had become more maze than battlefield. Cassino was not a place for wide maneuvers. It was a place of angles, corners, blind approaches, and hidden resistance. That was where the weapon belonged. Ahead, another position revealed itself, not as obvious as the first, but present in the way fire began to return. Rifle shots cracked from somewhere deeper within the ruins, followed by the sharper, more controlled bursts of another machine gun finding its range. The platoon dropped low again, instinctively taking cover behind whatever fragments of structure they could find. The advance slowed, not stopped, but checked. Hensley pressed against a low section of broken wall, listening as rounds struck the stone above him. The sound was familiar now, the same pattern of resistance, the same controlled fire meant to pin and hold. He glanced back. The crew was already moving the weapon into position. No orders needed, no hesitation, because the pattern had been recognized. The response had been proven. The gun was set again behind partial cover, angled toward the direction of the incoming fire. The crew worked quickly, efficiently, with the confidence that comes not from theory, but from immediate, visible results. The loader prepared the round. The gunner adjusted, The commander observed the line of fire, waiting for confirmation of the target. The difference this time was not just in the weapon. It was in the expectation. Before, there had been doubt. Now there was none. "Ready," the gunner said. The platoon commander didn't hesitate. "Fire!" The shot echoed through the ruins, its deep concussion cutting through the sharper sounds of small arms fire. The round struck the suspected position, and once again the effect was immediate. Stone broke, dust rose, and the return fire faltered. Not entirely gone, but disrupted. Exposed. Again. The second round followed quickly. This time, the position did not hold. A section of the structure collapsed inward, revealing the interior in the same way the previous strongpoint had been opened. The defenders were forced to shift, to move, to react, and in that reaction they lost control of the approach. "Move!" The platoon advanced again, faster this time, more confident. The pattern repeated. Position, fire, break, advance. Across the ruins of Cassino, this method began to take hold, not just within this platoon, but among other units that observed the effect. Reports moved quickly through the lines. A weapon once dismissed was now being requested, not because of its appearance, but because of what it allowed infantry to do. It changed the engagement from a slow, attritional push into something more controlled, more deliberate. Strongpoints no longer had to be flanked at great cost or endured through prolonged fire. They could be opened, directly, force applied where it mattered. Carter, moving now alongside the advancing line, watched as another position gave way under the same method. He had seen artillery used before. He had seen air support called in. But this was different, closer, immediate. The effect was not delayed. It was part of the movement itself. The weapon did not sit behind the line. It moved with it, and that changed how the battle unfolded. German defenders began to adjust. They had to. Positions that had been secure were now vulnerable to direct, close-range fire that they had not initially accounted for. The thick stone that had protected them from rifles and machine guns was no longer enough when something heavier could be brought within range. Some positions held longer. Others broke quickly. But the certainty that had defined their defense was gone. And once that certainty breaks, everything becomes harder to hold. By late afternoon, the platoon had advanced farther than it had in the previous day. Not through overwhelming force, not through massed assault, but through repeated, precise application of the same method. Break the position, then move. Behind them, the path they had taken was marked not just by distance, but by the remains of strongpoints that had once controlled it. And at each one, the same story had played out. The same weapon, the same result. The garage gun had not replaced other tools of war. It had simply found its place. And in Cassino, that place mattered more than anyone had expected. By nightfall, the ruins of Cassino had changed in ways that could not be measured on a map. The town was still broken, still contested, still filled with positions that had yet to be taken. But along one section of the line, through a series of streets and shattered structures, something had shifted. Ground that had resisted repeated attempts was now in British hands, not because the defenses had been weaker, but because they had been approached differently. The strong points that once defined that stretch of the battlefield were no longer intact. They had not been bypassed. They had been opened. And that distinction mattered. Hensley sat for a moment behind a section of collapsed wall, the weight of the day settling into his muscles as the light began to fade. Around him, the sounds of movement continued, quiet voices, equipment being shifted, positions being reinforced for the night. The fight was not over. It never was in a place like this, but for now there was space. He looked back along the route they had advanced. It wasn't a clean path. It wasn't even clearly defined. But it was marked by absence. The absence of fire from positions that had once held them. The absence of resistance where strong points had been broken. The absence of the hesitation that had slowed every movement before. Further behind, the weapon rested where it had last been placed, its silhouette low and unremarkable against the ruins. His crew sat nearby, conserving energy, speaking little. There was no sense of ceremony around it. No recognition beyond the practical understanding of what it had done. It still looked the same, compact, rough in appearance. Nothing about it suggested importance. And yet, throughout the day, it had done something that larger, more conventional weapons had struggled to achieve in that environment. It had gone where it was needed, and it had delivered force exactly where it mattered. The platoon commander moved along the line, checking positions, speaking quietly to his men. When he reached Hensley, he paused briefly, following his gaze back toward the route they had taken. "Different today," he said. Hensley nodded. Not because the fighting had been easier, but because it had been possible. That was the difference. In Cassino, difficulty was expected. Resistance was constant. But the ability to act, to move forward without being completely halted by a single position, was what defined progress. And that had changed. Across the battlefield, similar lessons were beginning to take hold. Units that had struggled against fortified positions were adapting, looking for ways to apply force more directly, more precisely. The idea that strongpoints had to be endured or slowly reduced was being challenged. Because now there was proof that they could be broken quickly, if the right tool was used in the right way. The garage gun was not a solution to every problem. It did not replace artillery. It did not remove the need for infantry. But within the narrow, confined, unforgiving geometry of urban combat, it filled a gap that had been exposed by experience. It allowed soldiers to bring decisive force forward, not from a distance, but from within the fight itself. As darkness settled over the ruins, the town grew quieter, not silent but subdued. The day's engagements gave way to the tense stillness of night, where movement became more cautious and every sound carried further than it should. Hensley leaned back slightly, closing his eyes for a moment before opening them again. The image of the first strongpoint remained clear in his mind, the way it had held, the way it had controlled everything in front of it, and the way it had broken, not gradually, not through prolonged effort, but in seconds. He glanced once more at the weapon resting behind the line. It hadn't looked like much, still didn't, but that no longer mattered, because the men who had seen it work did not measure it by its design. They measured it by its effect. And in a place like Cassino, that was the only measure that counted. Somewhere beyond the ruins, the battle would continue. Other positions would be defended. Other advances would be contested. But the method would remain, carried forward from one street to the next, from one strong point to another, a quiet adjustment in how the fight was approached. One that did not announce itself loudly but changed outcomes all the same. The nickname would fade, or remain used without meaning, because after a day like this, no one who depended on it would confuse its purpose again. The weapon had never been about how it looked. It had been about where it worked. And in the broken streets of Cassino, it had found exactly that place.